Well, welcome back to the DMZ America podcast. I'm Scott Stantis coming to you from the right.
I'm Ted Rall coming to you from the left.
So, in a recent interview, Kathy Griffin was talking about the PTSD she has suffered since, what was it, 2 years ago, Ted, 3 years ago, where she held up a mask of Donald Trump.
2017.
Okay, well, more than that. Okay, for Jesus, so almost 6 years ago. And believe me when I tell you, this stuff doesn't wear off in a little bit of time. But she held up a mask. For those of you who don't remember, held up a mask of Donald Trump. It was covered in blood, like he had been decapitated, and she's holding the head up. Bad taste.
Like sort of like it was a reference
ISIS,
to
yeah,
ISIS videos. Yeah.
right. So, yeah, I mean, was it bad taste? Yeah, I thought it was stupid, but okay, life is full of stupid people doing stupid stuff. I've never been a fan of hers, but
That's
she
neither
had
here nor there.
that
Yeah.
is neither here nor there either. But what I liked and really, frankly, admired about her discussion recently, she did an interview saying that she has been suffering from symptoms of PTSD, and pretty debilitating ones. She said even recently she had one that lasted 8 hours. Ted and I'm going to put myself in with Ted, although Ted has been hit on a national level. I have not, at least to this degree. Where you become the subject of disdain, of death threats, of just frankly an overblown reaction to something you have done. I had something here in Birmingham, and there is a mayor who died in jail. So whoop. Sorry, I shouldn't have been gleeful about that. Yes, I should have. He died in fucking jail. And he was a piece of shit. But he decided he bought a bunch of black ministers and decided that I was a racist. And can I tell the cartoon real quick, Ted?
Please.
It was a mayor's race. He was one of the candidates, another candidate, and then a third one. And he was an Eastern educated African-American young man, very sharp. And both he and the other candidate painted this guy as like he's the white candidate, even though he clearly wasn't. But that was their take. So I did a cartoon. This is editors and how fucking stupid they can be, folks. So stay with me here. This is a true story. The cartoon was Larry Langford and William Bell were the two black candidates. The third one, his name was Cooper. And they're patting him on the back, saying, "Good going. We're really glad you're in the race." But they're patting him on the back and putting signs that says "honky" on the back of him. And my editors actually demanded that I change the cartoon. Because they're editors.
Before it went to press?
Before it went into the later printing editions, it got into the early editions. And Ted, are you sitting down? Because apparently these guys were too fucking stupid to understand that it also went online.
Which means it can never be taken back.
There you go. So I changed it to the signs changed from honky to white conservative. Yeah, I just at some point you just go, this is so. I came with an eyelash saying just don't run it because that's dumb, but I didn't. It ran that way. The Larry Langford camp said, made a big deal out of that the cartoon was changed and how dare I use the word honky. And it's just like, really? Because I am one. I mean, I can't.
Yeah, not to mention, it's such an archaic term.
Yeah, it's a dumb archaic
term. Does anyone still use it? I mean, I've heard black people insulting white people, including me, and I've never heard anyone use the word honky.
Right. And that was the point. Is this such a silly 1970s, Sanford and Son word?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he sicked these ministers on me, and they had protests outside the office of how racist I was. I mean, it was so ginned up and so preposterous, but I was devastated. First of all, because my editor would not let me speak publicly on this issue. And I really desperately wanted to get out there and address it. Second, they said that the paper refused to quote me. My own paper did not quote me on a cartoon I fucking drew that had my name on it.
What do you mean refused to quote? You mean like they ran an article about it?
And they ran several articles.
And they didn't talk to you about it?
No. And so they talked about how their mission in the community, how this was, they're just misdirected and how this is silly. And they thought they were managing it and making it go away. And it didn't go away. It lasted 2 weeks, which sounds like nothing, right?
So what happened? Yeah, like what were the specific consequences?
It turns out we eventually had to sit down with all the parties concerned.
No,
And
I mean in terms of like the controversy, like what was happening, phone calls,
yes,
emails.
organized protests by these five black ministers in Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
So the optics were terrible, and they're saying that Stantis is obviously a racist, and and they run pictures of me in their little church bulletins, and of course I am a honky.
True. Yes, you are.
Maybe the honkiest of the honkies. And it was galling to just, and my paper never saying Scott Stantis, and never, ever, ever Ted said something as basic as Scott Stantis has worked at the Birmingham News for 7 years. His work speaks for itself. He's never, ever issued a racist statement, uttered a racist word. Scott Stantis, never a defense of me, ever. A defense of the paper, a defense of the institution, but never a defense of me.
Of course, because they didn't care about you.
No, they didn't give two shits. So, and that was a hard lesson to learn as well, because,
were there any threats?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
For instance,
there's an African-American afternoon talk show host on the air in Birmingham who talked about, if he ever sees me, he's going to beat me bloody. And this guy also would, love to call people gay and fags and all this, and use all that kind of language. So I got a lot of that, which was weird given, I wouldn't matter if I was, but to this guy, it mattered a lot. So just completely deconstructing,
were you scared?
That's a great question. I've had other death threats that I took much more seriously. Mm-hmm. This guy was, in fact, I called into
someone who listens to him might.
Yeah. I called his show and he wouldn't let me on, but I talked to him off the air and I said, "Hey, asshole, you know where I work. Just show up. Let's do this." Because I was so angry. Mm-hmm. He didn't. And anyway, so that's.
If he had, I suspect I would have heard about this.
Yeah, he probably would have. Frankly, he probably would have won, but I would have been one of those. Shit! Look at this. He showed up in the offices about 6 months later. Larry Langford, the guy who started all this, hired him to be on his staff, the mayor's staff. It was crazy. This guy was an idiot. And so I just walked up to him and introduced myself, like my nose right up on his nose, and said, "So, how's it going?" He didn't have a hell of a lot to say at that point. Anyway, but okay, so that was mine, and that was here in Birmingham. You didn't hear about it nationally. It wasn't. No. Ted Rall has been the target of this kind of thing on a national scale, international scale. And do you want to talk about it a little bit and just kind of tee it up?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll try to keep it brief, probably because a lot of people who listen to the podcast probably are well aware of a lot of this stuff anyway. But there's been a bunch of controversies, but definitely the peak of them was during the very early days, the first couple of years after 9/11 and the war on terror. My anti-Bush stuff got a lot of negative response from the right. The two biggest were cartoons called Terror Widows, and a cartoon I did about the former Arizona Cardinals tight end, I think he was, or quarterback.
No, defensive player. No, defensive player.
Pat Tillman, and his death in Afghanistan. Anyway, so the thing is, the Terror Widows cartoon basically sort of drew a line, and it was making fun of widows who had lost someone in 9/11, who seemed to be capitalizing on the deaths of their spouses to make money, sell books, get more publicity, and in one case, promote born-again Christianity. The Pat Tillman cartoon was basically making fun of the death cult that had kind of popped up around Tillman's death. There was a giant John McCain led memorial service for Tillman that was nationally televised from Arizona. And that cartoon was basically saying that, he should not be viewed as a hero. He should be viewed as someone who was like, either basically an idiot who agreed to go and fight for the war machine, and in Iraq first, and then Afghanistan later. It was really primarily not a critique of him, but it was a critique of the media coverage and how he was being so lionized. And I was kind of thinking, well, you gave up this career, and not to mention his family, right? Because he had a wife. I don't know if he had kids or not.
Yeah, I can't remember.
But anyway, the point is he gave everything up to go fight for George W. Bush and his insane wars. There was more to it than that, but nobody knew that at the time, and neither did I. And turned out later, when I talked to his mom, many moons later, that he was actually, he had signed up because his brother had already enlisted, and the military recruiters told him that he could join the same unit and be able to watch his brother's back in the military if he joined, which is, of course, such incredible nonsense.
Yeah, you can't do that. In
No,
fact, they have rules
just
against siblings serving together.
But military recruiters will literally tell you anything you want to hear. If you're like, oh, I'll join the military, but I would like to date Joe Biden's daughter, they'd be like, yeah, you could totally do that. That's fine. Just sign here. I was like, oh, did I say that? No, I didn't say that. So we never said that. Fuck you. We don't make promises. So anyway, those two, the controversy from those things were enormous. And so the phone started ringing. It was night and day. Literally, I would take voicemails off. They'd be like, you have 27 messages. I'd be like, delete, down to 27. You have 63 new messages in the time that I was listening to the 27 messages. So in each of these cases, and there were other cartoons that also were not quite as controversial, but were still, by most cartoonist standards, they were really crazy. So there were a lot of threats of violence, some of them very specific.
Like what? Can you share any of those?
Sure. There was one, like I remember, like it's like the cartoon about about terror widows referred to slitting your throat. And so people called and said, I'm going to slit your throat. I'm going to slit your wife's throat. Some people found out where I lived from the internet, and they were like, I know you live at blah, blah street, and I'm coming to kill you tonight. They were my favorite and there were many. I logged 1,200 death threats, not just threats of injury, before I stopped counting. I had an Excel spreadsheet, and one of them came from a caller ID, was from a police precinct in Brooklyn. And it was a police captain who called from the NYPD and said he was coming to kill me. And his name was on my caller ID. And I was talking to friends about it, and I'm like, who am I supposed to call? The police? I mean,
yeah, it is terrifying. I mean, I've had my comic strip Prickly City. There's a guy who did one called Shrubville, which was he commented on my comic strip every day. I have to respect his tenacity.
Wow.
And I thought it was kind of cool, and I actually talked about it on my old podcast, which I did about the comic strip, but until the motherfucker actually posted my home address.
He doxed you.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah, DOXX. Mm-hmm.
Why DOXX?
I don't know where it comes from.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whatever that. Well, okay, but yeah, he did that, and he gave my home address. And at that point, I called the attorney for the syndicate. I said, you need to contact this guy and tell him no.
Yeah,
just no. And but I mean, here's a side story, quick one. I was the president of the American Association of Editorial Cartoonists at the time. This is how Ted and I got to be friends, because this controversy blows up. The Terror Widow thing blows up. I'm invited to be on Alan Key's show. I thought we were going to have a rational, discussion with nuance and with, it was pretty much him. And remember Congressman King, I think from Long Island.
Oh yeah.
It was those two guys tag,
Asshole.
total asshole. But they were tag teaming me and just blasting
And dumb as
away.
a stone too. King was dumb as a
Well,
stone.
he said that we should ban cartoons. We should actually they should be approved by the government. I'm going, wow, really?
What country do you live in? Yeah.
Well, we know which one he wants to live in, and it has a catchy, catchy national anthem. It goes Deutschland, Deutschland. But Alan Keyes was the same way, and so I'm trying to say, listen, I don't agree with this cartoon, but, and I could barely get to the but when they would just start screaming at me, and the transcript of it is hilarious. Because I'm not, but, and then you hear all the transcript says is, inaudible, 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 because we're just screaming at each other over each other. It was a bad performance on my part, and you gave me shit for it. You emailed me and said you should have talked to me first. You're probably right, because you could have given me some pointers how to do it. But I wrote back to you and said, well, yeah, I fucked up. This was a bad performance. This is bad optics for our profession. I did a bad job. And you and I became friends from there.
That's true.
All of this is to say, I'm sorry, this is such a long lead up. You don't forget this stuff. I still wake up at 3 a.m. with anxiety, with horrible anxiety attacks. I mean, how does this manifest itself that way? Either the way I describe it or the way Kathy Griffin describes it for you, or what do you, I guess all of this, I also want to say this to our listeners. We don't just blow it off. We're not like 7-year-olds. We got him. Oh, we pissed him off. That's so great.
Right.
There are some of our.
We're human beings. I mean, Kathy
Yeah.
Griffin is a human being. She's a person. I mean, if it's sort of like effectively being at the center of a controversy like that is like those images from the Cultural Revolution where the entire village gathers and they put the person who they're mad at in a dunce cap, maybe with a sandwich board over their necks, and everyone in the town yells at them. You're a bad person. You're an enemy of communism. You hate the people. You're a fucker. You're an asshole. We all hate you. You suck. You should die. And you have 1,000 people yelling at you. That's effectively what it feels like when you're in the middle of like a Twitter pile-on or like an online discussion group pile-on. And we've seen, for example, teenagers who've been at the center of these kinds of 2-minute hates on the internet, and some of them have taken their own lives. And it's not, I have to say, it's not surprising. For me, I think everybody probably experiences it differently. For me, the part that was so devastating was not the threats themselves. It was the lack of feeling so alone and feeling like nobody else was going to come to my defense or care, and that no one was going to say.
I'm just showing Ted. I just wrote a note here that I said you feel very, and with 3 underlines, alone.
Yeah, you feel alone. It's like you would kind of like to think, like in the movies, that someone would step up and, like, in my case, I would have wanted a conservative to step forward and say, like, leave Ted Rall alone. He's a good guy. He's just exercising his rights. Get a sense of humor. Like, cut the shit. Like, it's not acceptable to threaten people with death because you don't like their cartoons or their political opinions. And like, look at what happened at Charlie Hebdo. Literally, that's the extreme manifestation of that kind of ideology, that you can respond to what is essentially just ink on paper with like threats of violence and death. And, and the idea that you're being judged based on, like, in my case, maybe half a dozen cartoons out of the thousands that I've done. And for you, it's the same thing. It's like you do thousands and, nobody cares, and or like no one's mad. And then suddenly you do one thing no one likes. So, and everyone hates you.
Did your editors who distributed your work, were they supportive, or did they run for cover, or what was their reaction?
Well, so it was varied. My freelance clients, it was all over the place. So I had a gig doing a cartoon about sex and relationships for Men's Health. And obviously the cartoon had nothing to do with politics. The publisher decided to fire me over this controversy. He was a Republican and just didn't like me as a person, even though I wasn't doing anything political for him. And so he decided to fire me. He had 7 staffers quit over it, the art
Oh, wow.
director
Well, good
and a
for
bunch
them.
of senior editors. And they all said to me, like, listen, it's not really personal. It's a matter of principle. We can't tolerate this sort of thing because it's McCarthyism. Like, the definition of McCarthyism is to be fired over work that appeared in a different medium, right? Like, let's say you're a public school teacher and then you go and attend a communist meeting and you never talked about communism in school, but you get fired for having attended a communist meeting as a teacher. That's McCarthyism, and that's what that was. The syndicate, which was at the time Universal Press Syndicate, today it's Andrews McMeel, I'm still with them. They were good. They were like, look, we've been through this with Gary Trudeau many times. We have lots of experience. Let us know how we can help. But, this is sort of the person who was probably the most helpful was a fellow cartoonist who was known for a lot of controversial cartoons. And I asked him what to do. And he said, and he gave me like line by line advice about how to manage the crisis.
Wow. Who was it?
Well, let's just say he's your least favorite cartoonist.
Oh, okay.
And he was a very controversial guy back in the day. And so he said, so the advice he gave me was, for example, never talk to local television because it'll only make you look bad and it'll never help you. Wait when you make sure you reply to the Associated Press, tell them that you don't have time to talk to them on the phone, ask them to email the questions. That way you can carefully craft your response and write them in such a format that if any sentence were taken out of context and quoted by itself, it would not make you look bad. So because when you talk on the phone, you say and ah, and you say things that might sound okay in a conversation, but don't look good in a transcript. So there was a lot of advice like that. It also like turned down conservative media. I ignored that. I kind of enjoy the Daniel and the Lion's Den approach, and I feel like I can defend myself pretty well. I think I did acquit myself well when I did appear on Fox and stuff. If you survive, you've acquitted yourself well. But I mean, getting to Kathy's point though, it's true. I mean, I think that like when you're in the arena, as Theodore Roosevelt said, you take a lot, you come out of it with a lot of scars. And they don't really go away. And it's that sense of feeling isolated. And you're kind of like, man, I wish someone would have stood up for me, but they just don't, because no one really cares except you. I mean, it's kind of like, sucks to be you. Oh, well.
Yeah, well, that's what happened with me. I mean, my editors were like, and in fact, when it really got bad and I was getting threatened on the radio, I asked, can I get some kind of protection? Can we have some kind of security? And they said no.
That's crazy. I mean,
well, they would say I was at the Chicago Tribune, and some asshole starts sending me threatening stuff 2, 3, 4 times a week. I said, I need some protection here. And they said, oh, we all get that. I go, no one ever sends this to a fucking editorial writer. It never happens.
No, that's bullshit. Yeah. Not to mention nobody even knows who writes the editorials.
Right. So I mean, they don't care.
I had, I was a number of years later on an ISIS death threat list, me and another cartoonist. And it's ironic. I always thought that, like, yeah, well, obviously ISIS is full of morons, because I'm probably they should love my cartoons. I'm anti-US intervention in the Middle East.
Yeah. That's why I'm shocked.
Like I should be ISIS's favorite cartoonist. I'm not pro-ISIS, but, definitely, I don't go after them. I don't think the US should be involved over there. And anyway, the point is they just sort of had it out like, I think it was kind of like, who are famous American cartoonists? And they were spitballing a bunch of them. And then it was like, oh, let's kill Ted Rall and this other guy. And so I got notified by the FBI of this. And so long story short, they liaised with my local PD, who at the time I lived out in the sticks, and they parked a black and white at the end of the street and checked IDs of everybody coming onto my street. I had them for a month, and in the community where I lived, they had a lot of public figures, and they have a squad that's assigned specifically to dealing with threats against public figures. So I was really lucky.
Okay.
If I'd lived somewhere else, I would have felt less secure. But if they'd wanted to come and kill me and climbed my back fence with AR-15s, they could have.
Yeah, I actually had the most serious death threat was when I worked at the Arizona Republic, and this guy left it on my answering machine. That's how long ago it was. And we did have police protection because a reporter for the Arizona Republic had been blown up like 12 years earlier. So there's kind of history there. So what is it though, Ted? I have to ask you, it does make me laugh that you had protection for a month. I had protection for a month. Why do they think a month is that's the sweet spot, that the lunatics can't wait 32 days?
That's a good question. Yeah, I was kind of like thinking this seems pretty arbitrary, right?
Yeah.
I've also had police protection at public appearances. I gave a speech in Charlotte at the City Hall in Charlottesville, Virginia, in the run up to the invasion of Iraq, and they got a lot of death threats. So the local, I don't think they were state police. I think it was Charlottesville local police. One uniformed officer with those awesome hats that you Southern cops have.
Oh, the Smokey the Bear hats.
Yeah. Only you can prevent forest fires. Only you can prevent cartoonists. And one on each side of the stage. And I'm not exactly the most pro cop person ever, but man, I was happy to see them. Really, truly.
Yeah, I bet. So I guess we've kind of tap danced around the PTSD for ourselves, but I just want to say,
I was formally diagnosed just like Kathy, by two therapists. It's like, so it's, I don't have panic attacks. I have nightmares, cold sweats. I think about this stuff a lot. I look both ways when I leave my home. This is all going on, fortunately, my super in my old building in New York was kind enough to let me use the utility exit through a back alley, and I was able to sort of skirt the front door. I was always, sometimes when I walk through the streets, I check behind me to make sure nobody's following. I'll tell you, when I make a public appearance, I'm scared. Like, I think if I'm giving if I do a book signing or a talk at a college or whatever, I'm like, oh my God, I could be shot. And I could be. I mean, that's true.
Yeah, it's really easy. I mean, I would walk back and forth when I worked at the Tribune. I mean, I was walking the streets. I mean, and anyone who knows what I look like, and I was on TV, and I was going to say radio a lot, but that doesn't really help identify you unless you're talking. But I was on television regularly, and I was, it's easy to go online and find my image. Yeah. So I was with you. I was like, this is scary. I mean, there were some days when, and when that guy I mentioned started sending the threatening mail, I went, oh, well, okay. I'm going to be walking to work someday, and not Scott's not coming home.
Yeah.
It does, and it weighs on your mind. It does change how you view the world, and it does scare the shit out of you. And so if any of you out there think that somehow Ted or I or Kathy Griffin just let this slide off our backs like water on a goose, it's simply not the case. It leaves a mark. It really does. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting topic. And
yeah, me too.
So coming up next, we're going to be talking about another happy one, about the American prison system and how it's so good. Best country in the world. Am I right, Ted?
The best. USA.
We'll be back right after this. I'm Scott Stantis, coming to you from the right.
Ted Rall coming to you from the left.